Welcome to the Talent Cast, the lost episodes, or the lost interviews. I haven't decided what to call them as I record this, so I guess I have decided what to call them. Anyway, I did 4 amazing interviews during my break, my hiatus, well, at least when my hiatus started, when I was planning on coming back to the Talent Cast very quickly, and I have not made decisions as to whether or not I'm coming back to the Talent Cast, but I had these amazing interviews with some amazing, wonderful, smart people that I knew if I kept on my hard drive any longer, the guilt would just kill me, and I needed to get these things out to the world. So that's what we're doing. We're releasing the lost interviews in one foul swoop. I hope you enjoy them, but we have a few housekeeping notes, first of which is I have got to thank Chad and Cheese of Chad and Cheese. That's that's Chad Sowash and Joel Cheeseman, who not only are good friends of mine and who just turned 50 a day apart from each other. So that feels suspicious somehow. Anyway, neither here nor there. They and the Evergreen Network have sponsored and kept my podcast going for the last year plus, and I really do appreciate what them and what they've done and how they've really kind of pushed the employer brand recruitment marketing space forward in the podcast world. So thank you, Joel. Thank you, Chad. Thank you so much for having me as part of this network. And we'll see where the future takes us. I don't know where that's going to be. 2 other notes. First, that book I wrote and then that other book I wrote? I'm making them free. Not just, hey, it's on Amazon, I don't have any cost here, I'm lowering the cost really. I mean, literally, I put it all in a Google Doc, and if you go to employerbrandbook.com, it takes you to the Google Doc. The actual text and images of the books are right there. They're freely available for you to read, for you to copy and paste, for you to clip stuff from, for you to share, to give to your boss, to give to your coworkers, whatever you want, I'm putting it out in the world. My goal, as always, both of the podcast and the newsletters and the books and all that stuff, is to raise the conversation of employer brand, to let people know how amazing employer brand can be. Rather than try and flog a book, I'm trying to say, here, take it, get some value out of it. Share this with people who need to have their perspective changed on what employer brand can be. That's what it's all there for. I don't make a penny. How could I? It's a Google Doc. So please share. That again is employerbrandbook.com. Second thing, my efforts that used to go into the podcast now go into a weekly newsletter called Employer Brand Headlines. If you like the podcast, you're going to love the headlines. Why? 1, you don't have to hear my voice. 2, I write like I talk, so it's almost like you hear my voice. And 3, you can read my little newsletter in much less time it takes than to listen to a podcast. So there you go. It's much faster. If you go to employerbrand.news, there it is. Go ahead and sign up. It's free. It drops every Monday. And, we have 1,500 subscribers, which I think makes us the biggest employer brand newsletter in the world, which is crazy, but there you go. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Like I said, I don't know what the future holds, but I appreciate you being a part of it and listening and sharing and telling me what you thought. I really listened to every word. I don't know where the future is. I don't know where we're heading, but I look forward to what we've got next. So without any further ado, thank you so much again. Here's the interview. Just so you know, for this interview, Andrew and I had some technical issues, mostly on the audio side, and the audio cuts in and out in some funny spots. I apologize. I tried to fix it as best I can, and my questions kind of dropped out towards the end, so Andrew just kind of finishes it on his own. So there you go. Just letting you know ahead of time that you're not drunk. Well, maybe you are. How would I know? But yeah, we had some issues in this one. But and just one more time, Andrew, thank you so much. Amazing interview. Here we go. All right. Thanks, everybody. I want you to welcome someone who I met, I guess, about 3 years ago now at a conference. And Audra's fault for this, as all things in this, the Talent Cast is. It's always Audra's fault. But this is Andrew Gadomski, who is just one of those people who he makes no sense, but at the same time, that makes him a genius. It's very possible. He is the chief cook and bottle washer of a company called Aspen Analytics. Audra did tell me, and this is a story I'll pass along. I hope Audra doesn't mind. I'm sure she won't. When she turned to you at some point during conferences, says, "What exactly do you do all day?" And you said, wearing a very sharp suit, I might add, no one really knows. And that's actually to my benefit. And I thought that was fantastic. So hopefully we'll open that up a little bit today, talking about data, talking about analytics, talking about something a little more holistic than just tactics and stuff. So thank you, Andrew, for being a part of this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much, James. It's kind of funny. I don't know if you're a fan of the show Mad Men, but there's a great there's a great line by the character who plays Roger Sterling, and
Mhm.
Roger says, nobody knows what I do. It adds to my
Yeah.
mystique. So
We'll get you a white wig, and then you'll be right there.
perfect.
You already got the suit.
I've already got the suit. I just need the hair.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you give us like a quick 30-second spiel of how you got to here? I think it's fascinating that, you worked at some pretty big name companies, you did some pretty high level stuff, some pretty strategic stuff, and you shifted away from that to think a little more holistically using data. Can you give us a little bit of insight on how you got from point A to point B?
Well, I went to school for engineering and marketing and then logistics. I mean, so I was and I ended up doing a bunch of work in the technology sectors. I didn't get into recruiting. I wasn't, I didn't have like a little glint in my eye, as a 6-year-old saying, when I want to grow up, I want to be a recruiter or I want to
No
be a
one
data
does.
scientist. Nobody does. Like everybody else, it's like, how did you get into recruiting? Like by accident.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I ended up taking a couple of interviews with some executive search firms, and one of them said, you know, so look at this straight. Chemical engineering, logistics, and you know how to sell stuff, and you used to work at a call center. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, how about we make you a recruiter?
Yeah.
Whatever that is. So
Yeah.
I drank that Kool-Aid, right? And I ended up, they gave me the phone book and said, call everybody in this directory and ask them if they want a job, basically. But I, but I was good at it. It was the 90s. I mean, it was the late 90s, and
So much can be explained by the phrase, but it was the 90s.
it's like, and so you're dialing for dollars, and I was working as a in an executive search firm, working for a partner, which means that you basically eat street food for lunch because they pay you so
Mm-hmm.
little.
Yep.
But I was dialing for dollars, doing supply chain executive search, and it was cool. And after a couple of weeks, I come home and I say to my wife, "This whole industry is broken. I
Mm.
mean, crazy broken." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "No one uses any kind of technology. They all use paper. Meanwhile,
Mm-hmm.
everything is going to converge onto the internet, and you know everything's going to go with all, using technology, using data. No one is seeing this." And she's like, "So what do you want to do?" I said, "I think I want to open a business that focuses on how do you use technology and tools to do recruiting better." And she's
Mm-hmm.
like, "Okay, you've been recruiting for like 3 weeks."
That's how obviously broken the industry was,
Right.
and to some extent still is.
Right, exactly. So you can kind of see it. And so I said, "Well, why don't I stick around? I'll learn a bunch, and then we'll see what happens." So
Yeah.
I go ahead and do that. And what was interesting is I ended up, getting promoted, running a team, all the things. And then I ended up getting a job at one of my accounts. I ended up moving over to Honeywell, and the idea was to work there just long enough for me to understand how like a Fortune 100 operates from the inside,
That's
right?
educational.
Oh yeah, it was blitz speed, right? I mean, people say, "Oh, you work 24 hours a day when you got 40 plants globally and a $5 billion business that you're running." And so, so we're doing that, and then but then I opened up the business, a couple years after that, and
Okay.
and I think it was okay. Throw up a shingle. And from then I was telling companies, send us your data and we'll take a look at the numbers and we'll tell you what we think. So that's a long time ago. It's 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I think over that time and how I got to where I am now is you've just got to sharpen the saw. And so you got to
Mm-hmm.
keep on asking for more data, and you keep on asking to connect to more systems. So stopped just asking for applicant tracking data and started asking for CRM data and HRIS data and then finance ledger data and then operational data and starting to blend it together. And at the same time, yeah, but the idea being is that I said, keep sharpening the saw. Let me go back to school, really learn this stuff from an academic perspective, and then already have a level of subject matter expertise in HR, but now really become more of an expert academically on analytics. And so that has been a wild ride. I mean, it has been, I feel very welcome when I'm in dialogues with people who are in analytics, people who, CHROs. I feel in a very good space with people in employment branding because they're very data oriented now. But it's an interesting set of crosshairs that's gotten me to where I'm at, and it's a lot of fun working with. We work with multinational big companies or government agencies for the U.S. federal government, and they have tremendously large problems. No one comes to the business because they need reporting. Like, they can use their ATS or their CRM or Google Analytics for reporting.
Yeah.
It's things like, how do we know our brand is becoming more familiar globally? Right? Or, how do we strategically find people when we know we have to pay them less because we're the federal government?
Yeah.
Right? And oh, by the way, do that thousands of times over. Right?
Yeah.
Those are harder questions to answer, but the questions are usually available in the data, James. You just got to know how to ask the sharp question.
Yeah, I mean, because if you go back 5 years ago, I mean, the conversations, we were having in the agency and the in-house space was, how do you fix this tiny little problem? Our conversion rate isn't very good. Or how do we know people going to our ATS are applying, or they want to apply, or they know how to apply? Let's find this. It was very tactical. It was, let's look at the entire journey and see where the problem is. And I love how you started, your conversation by saying, just give me the data. And it's not about, let me solve that particular problem. It's like, let's go find problems. Let's go figure out what the bigger issues are. And I think that is a shift in conversations that's happened across the industry, that we are looking a little bit more holistically.
Yeah. And I think, I've used this hashtag for about a decade now, but it's talk data to me. And so where does that come from? And it's like, look, you have a hunch that you may have a hunch what the problem is, right? Or you have a conditional bias, right? You think you have a bad ATS because you want to run an ATS implementation, right?
But yeah,
right.
Except everybody has a bad ATS because every ATS is mostly bad. So
right.
Yeah, what are you complaining about? But anyway,
but there's things like that where you say, instead of you trying to figure out what the problem is, why don't we try to find where the problems are in the data and see how often those are replicating, and whether or not what you're interpreting is an outlier or what you're interpreting is actually patterned and can be influenced. Because in some cases, it may not be. It might just be, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Or this is the way it is unless you spend another $3,500 a hire. Okay. Maybe that's worthy of an idea. But
so,
yeah.
Go ahead. No, finish up.
And I think that, by getting more data, and then, candidly, having very strong data integrity, recruiters are not in the yes business. As much as they talk, as much as I and others talk about the linkage between recruiting and hiring, from an activity perspective, recruiters do hiring very little.
Yeah.
Almost there's hardly any recruiter that has hiring authority. What Certainly. They have is rejection authority.
I like that. That's a good way to put that.
Right? They have the authority on behalf of their company, their employer, their staffing company, whatever, to say, no, you don't get to work here. But they don't have any authority usually. Some cases they do, but most recruiters never have the authority to say, yes, come and work here. Here's an offer letter. They have to get approval for that. Right.
And my wife is on the career counseling side, and she says one of the things she has to teach her students is that recruiters don't have, don't try and get on the recruiter's good side, because their job isn't to say yes. Their job is to figure out how to get rid of you. And so if you can show how you're solving a problem and they can't get rid of you, that's a win. So don't think about it as how do I get them to hire me? You can think about how do you get them to be an advocate for you? But ultimately, the real job is just past the recruiter.
Oh yeah, I mean, talent acquisition leaders, really are in a spot to understand that my job is to make sure my recruiters have all the resources that they need to see the talent that they need to say no to them as fast as possible, as nice as possible, and with the most equity as possible.
Yeah.
So other people can make decisions on who's going to get the job.
So
Because that's just how it
okay.
is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And and the recruiter is a facilitator. The recruiter is the happy, smiling face on the front of all this stuff to either say, "Here's the offer, and this is why it's a great offer," or, "Hey, you know what? It didn't quite work out, but the person who really said no to you isn't. We're protecting them from you."
Right. I mean, and it is, the air traffic control, right? It's a lot of that function, and I appreciate the pride that recruiters have, in um in their work and enabling people to find jobs, and that's at the end. But
Mm-hmm.
you think about like all the work that's been done about the candidate experience, right? And there's it's an excellent movement. I'm a huge proponent of it. But part of the problem with the experience is the fact that it's a rejection experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, why isn't it good? Because we don't do it real well. Like, by the way, that's the job.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
not
And
saying yes, it's saying
yeah.
no. And oh, by the way, not impacting the stock price, not
Mhm.
impacting diversity and inclusion in a negative way,
Yeah.
not impacting sales, not impacting our Glassdoor rating. Yeah, you have to do all those things.
Yeah, but that reframes the whole job. The job is now not about how do you find the best talent, but how do you make sure that even when all the chips are against you, all these let's be fair, hundreds and thousands of people you have to say no to, you want to make sure that they'd come back. You want to make sure if you think of the job as how do you ensure, even in a negative outcome, that they still had positive brand sentiment. That's the job. It's a whole different job suddenly.
Oh, absolutely. And companies are coming to us and asking the questions, now that the SEC in the United States has basically said you need to include human capital analytics and metrics inside your annual report, all of a sudden companies are really paying attention,
Yeah, yeah.
right? What do we do in HR to make us a better company? And let me tell you something. I know you've got a tremendous following, James. So listen up, employment branding leaders. If you think you don't make an impact, get ready. You talking about how you outreach, how you attract people, how you take care of them, and how that drives brand familiarity. Guess what? That's really big for anybody who's on
Yeah,
the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ who has to be regulated. Because guess
yeah.
what? Now, in your annual report and to the investment community who say you're a good a hold or you're a good buy, they're
Mhm.
looking at that data saying, yeah, they're making a lot of good efforts in human capital, and we believe that you should buy this stock.
Yeah, that's where the feedback loop starts. It's you're not making the tree, you're not making the leaves, you're not making turning sun into photos, into food, but you are watering the roots. And while it may take quarters and years before your good hiring work turns into a business outcome, where else is it coming from?
Right. They're now looking at, and I love that analogy. Are you doing the care and feeding? Do you have a nursery?
Yeah.
Or are you doing the care and feeding? How are you doing that? And oh, by the
Mhm.
way, what's the fruit that you're creating?
Yeah, because recruiting is shifting broadly from a hunter-gatherer system of I find it when I find it, or I'll go grab it by the hair and drag it back to my cave, moving towards a farming system where you're saying, look, we have to develop leads, we have to nurture them, we have to make sure internal mobility, we have referrals, we have all these tools, but it is a much more farmer model, at which point the person who plants the fertilizer in the water is doing the bulk of the work. The person who comes by and reaps all the crops and turns it into food, they may be seen as the profit center, but without you feeding feeding the plants, what crops are there?
Well, and employment branding is employment branding and sourcing, for whatever reason, people tend to think they're in the same function. I mean, I appreciate they're all in HR, they're all in recruiting, but the point of employment brand, in my humble, honest little data opinion, okay, is employment brand should be executed in such a way that the most commonly turned over jobs, the most critical jobs in sales, operations, and intellectual property, right, naturally produce candidates because of the employment brand. So if you make pharmaceuticals, scientists should want to come work for you.
Because of the pharmaceuticals you're making.
Right. Because of the pharmaceuticals you were making, and you said, hey, we're a really great place to work, and we build science here. And we need scientists. So scientists, come over here. Like, employment branding should kind of check the box on like the major jobs. And I use like the American Airlines like scenario. Forget the fact that there's a shortage of talent in certain areas like actual pilots. But, pilots, flight attendants, crew, mechanics for airplanes, those types of jobs, they should know that American Airlines is a place that they should work.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that, it's not that big of a leap, right? But you look at, like, as an example though, it's like, okay, so Amazon has to do they have to do a better job as an employment brand they own their own fleet. So how does Amazon have an employment brand around aerospace?
Yeah.
Right? How are they getting pilots? Because that's important to that part of their brand. So that's an issue. Now, in some cases, Amazon may say, no, we're not in the airline business. We're really in the technology business. And so then what you would do is say, okay, we're not going to have an employment brand that's going to get us airline pilots. Instead, we're going to have a sourcing function that gets that and then educates people on that.
Yeah.
And say, hey, by the way, did you know that we own a fleet? Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, we're a great place to work. Right?
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, employer brand is a function of a candidate's options. So if I'm a pilot, to take your story, if I'm a pilot, I know Delta and American and Southwest. I know the local fleet I can hire at, but I don't know beyond that. And I don't know about Amazon. I don't think about that stuff. If I'm a machine learning professional, if I'm an AI learning, Amazon's top of my list, or one of many that's at the top of my list. And so It's a function of where you could otherwise go. It's a function of your employment options. So if Amazon's going into the pilot game, they're fighting against Delta, who have bajillions of years of experience talking with and around pilots about the glory and the drama of flight, or whatever it is, and that's just not something Amazon can approach with.
Right, and I think, and then you have to say, so is Amazon going to have a huge global employment brand that focuses on pilots? You know what?
Yeah,
probably not. Will they have campaigns? Potentially, right? That's fair, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
So you're really breaking it down like a hierarchy of hiring needs. And so you're attaching, okay, for some roles, for warehouse employees, of whom they're going to hire 100 to 120,000 this year, there's a certain kind of brand and how much are you investing in it? Not just because those roles are not necessarily high paid, but even though with the volume, they're relatively commoditized. You can hire them from lots and lots of different places. And so a sourcing function might be plenty. But for a person who's going to invent the next a robot butler, I can't say the name because she's right behind me in the dining room. For the person who's going to invent the next one, well, that's a different story. And they have to know that the work that they do at Amazon is going to be more highly valued than it is at a Google or any other company. So that is a completely different conversation.
Right. And I think, there are, when you're in employment branding and that we have these volumes of jobs. And I think sometimes what people forget is they tend to look at how many jobs we hire. I always force, if I don't have to force, I just tell them what it is I get their data and then I tell them. And I say, you need to start looking at how many applicants you have and how much reach you have in a particular space based on the volume of jobs that you have.
Yeah.
So you may only hire 2,000 engineers a year, but you get 400,000 applications.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that dwarfs everything. Don't just say no to them, say no nicely. So when someone says, "Hey, did you ever take an interview over there at blah blah blah?" You know what? I did. They were cool. It wasn't for me. We didn't quite match up, but yeah, they're a good place. You know, that,
Yeah.
that that's the gold right there. That's the employment branding gold.
Yeah.
Is that
That you don't
the
need
tighter
that you don't
talent
need
market
advertising.
candidate, the candidates in the tight talent markets, even when you said no to them or they have decided to not apply to you, speak well of you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's not quite a NPS score where you would say, having bought it, I would recommend it, but you have a rejection PS score where you're saying, I didn't buy it, and here's why, but I would recommend it to other places.
Well, and so what's the what's the storyline, right?
Yeah.
So everything's got a data story, right? So when you think about what are the brand stories that an employment branding leader wants to create? Well, one branding story might be, we've made it very, I've worked with operations, and we've made it very easy to have people understand where they are in the process with us. So part of our brand is, you apply, it's a clean process, we get you feedback right away, whether or not you're moving forward within, say, a couple of days. Are we doing that 100% of the time, 95% of the time? You either are or you aren't, right? You either are or aren't doing that a lot of the time. If you
Mm-hmm.
aren't, that's your storyline for your applicants. Oh, part of our storyline in our brand, in our employment, is people apply and we don't get back to them. That's part of our storyline right now, right? Okay, maybe you don't like that, but that's the reality. The data says so. And the next thing is, the people that we interview, do we do it quickly? Do we do it efficiently? And do we give them feedback, even the ones we say no to? You either have that part as your part of your employment brand or you don't. And then you can talk all about what all your employees do and how they move up and how they, the benefits that we offer them and the stories that they have and why things are great. But, you know, you can track all that with the data. And it's funny how we spend so much time, James, on this, hey, I want to have a great storyline. I'm like, yeah, but your storyline needs to be reinforced when they apply.
Say that one more time, that one last bit, because I think you're drawing a conclusion and I agree with, but I want to hear you put it together one more time. So you've got hierarchy. You've got, okay, hey, did they get back to you? Did they ghost you? You've got how well was the interview process and did you get feedback? And I think I want to come back to that feedback part because I think that's critical. I'd love to hear what your data is telling us about that. And then you can get to the fun stuff of this is our culture and this is our employee experience and this is why people love us. So try that, put that together one more time.
So think about, so we have these you want to create these great data stories, or these great employment branding stories. Well, the employment brand story is not just the people who work for you. It's also about the people that you interview and the people and have the way that you assess talent. So when we think about a real good set of data stories for an employment brand, right? And ultimately, we go onto websites and we see these we see people doing, hey, here's Chris's story, right? Here's Mike's story. Here's, Maria's story. And those are great, right? But you need to make sure that the stories are not just about the culture and how people work. It's also about, hey, when we assess people, when we interview people, what does that look like? Why is that good? Why is that part of our culture, our assessment, and why does that make us successful? And then, what's the data story around the people who apply for us? How do we do that? Why do we do it that way? Do we attract diverse talent? Do we not attract diverse talent? You want all those stories to be part of the brand. And so when you look at the data and you say, okay, what stories can I talk about for applicants, for those who were evaluated, for those we interview, and then for those we hire? Is your applicant story really, I apply and no one gets back to me, most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your data? See if that's your data story, because that's a bad data story, which is a bad employment branding story. And by the way, if you don't control that, it's part of your employment brand anyway. Because when you go out the glass door, you know what you see?
Yeah.
They never got back to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of your brand. You just either chose to control it or not. Same thing with interviews. The people we bring in, how quickly do we bring them in? Do we bring them with diversity? Do we bring them in, do we bring a number in? Do we put them through a gauntlet? Or is it a pretty fair assessment process? What's that story? What would you put on your website to talk about it? How valid is that? And then what's the data backing it up? And you find out, hey, for all of our engineering roles, about 80% of their engineering roles that we have, we interview 4 people. Well, guess what? That's part of your employment brand story. You will apply here. You're going to be one of 3 or 4 people we're going to go through an interview process with. Why? Because we look for options. We look for diversity. We have hiring managers who are trained on interviewing and will listen to you. Please bring questions. Be ready. That's not part of your brand.
Yeah.
And you either control it or you don't. And when you don't, it appears out on Indeed.com in their comments saying, I went in for an interview and never heard back from the recruiter.
Yeah.
And then the CEO wonders, how come our Glassdoor rating is not great? The SEC, and the analysts are looking and we can't get stuff done. Well, because you didn't make it because it's not part of your dialogue, it will never be part of your data investigation.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, totally. So you brought up feedback the first time around. What is the data telling you that feedback is as crucial as all that?
I'm going to say that again.
So you talked about how important it is that, in the phase 2, you bring someone in for an interview, they say no, but you're getting feedback from the company about why you didn't get it. Is that kind of feedback crucial for this process? Is it crucial for employer brand? Is the data telling you that it's the sticking point to that? Or is that just something you're kind of seeing more holistically? You're seeing as part of the bigger question of what's the interview experience?
I think what I'm seeing first off is that the feedback loops are disconnected once people are screened or once people are interviewed. Now that's in the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the data, maybe I'll see company, so let's say a company does 3,500 hires a year, and then you ask the question, okay, how many people do you tend to interview for each hire? And they say, we shoot for 2 or 3 or 4. I'm like, great. So fair to say that I should see 11,000 interviews scheduled in your ATS? And they're like, well, in theory. And I'm like, yeah, here's the problem. I only see about 4,000. So what's up with that? Right? So does that mean that you either didn't schedule them or you don't have a paper trail? More importantly, did you ever reject them?
Yeah.
Right? And then how quickly did you do it? Or did you advance them, by the way? And I'm like, here's another thing. You look at the data and you say, okay, you did your 3,500 hires. You know what's kind of funny? They're like, what's kind of funny? I said, did you know that for 400 of your hires, you don't have an interview date or a screening date for any of them, and they're not internal transfers? They're like, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, nothing. Like, oh, you're trying to be, you talk about fairness, you talk about equity, you talk about wage parity, you talk about diversity and inclusion, and you talk how it's fair game for everybody. But I got data here that says that 10% of your core jobs have one and dones. They're like, well, we know we interviewed more. I said, guess what? When I get called to do the audit by someone who's suing you, this is what I present in court.
Oh, that's a gut punch.
I'm like, so you've got to do the work. I know you did it. Just tick the box. And then, and James, this become. And by the way, what a lift for an employment branding leader to say that they actually have data and proof that, hey, yeah, it's really easy right now to go out there and say, rah, 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 we do diversity and inclusion and we do wage parity and we're fair. Prove it.
what is it about recruiting that there's that sense of self-delusion? I mean, because you are effectively this amazing mirror. You get to stand in front of a company saying, you say you're all these things, but the data says this. One of the things I think I, as an employer brander, but also as a candidate, not in the not too recent past, is that every company says they get back to every candidate. They all say it. There's no one who says we don't do it. But then you say, hey, candidates, do you ever hear back from companies? And most of them will say, no, we don't generally. Where's the gap? Is it pure self delusion? Is it the assumption that the ATS is doing all this work? Or what do you see there?
Okay, so here's an example. So a large ERP HR system that will remain nameless had a glitch, right?
Mm.
And so and it was in any number of instances where for a period of time all the HR thought that when a requisition was closed, everybody got the letter that says, hey, the requisition is closed.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Right? And the thing is that, well, that letter wasn't going out. And so I look at the data and I say, you're not dismissing people. And they're like, well, there's something broken in such and such. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. I guess what I would ask is, why is that your process? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, okay, why do you wait 60 to 127 days, which is the data, to actually say to somebody who's applied, thanks so much, we filled the job. Like, that's the experience you created. I said, you realize you hardwired that process. So let's untether that and realize that that's not part of your brand. Your brand says that you will not get back to people for 60 to 120 days after they apply. And when you do, it's with the no, I'm not taking you to the prom letter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that's not a win.
Yeah. Especially since that's 99% of your talent market that you're telling that to.
Right. I'm like, you don't think these people talk? Of course they talk. Yeah. But you should, like, you could be the company that actually gets back to people. I said, so we've set up like dashboards and alerts and all these kinds of things and all kinds of systems. But it's like at the end of every week, there's reports that go out to say, hey, recruiters, here are the people that have aged 5 days in every single one of your recs that you haven't touched. And it's X% of your workload. Ugh. Your manager's seeing that. It's on a dashboard, and here's where you are versus your peer group. Let them know what's up.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. I mean, the job is to say no. Right? So you might as well do it quickly and do it quickly, efficiently, legally, and with class.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings me to my last question. And I think this is the most important one, but I think this has been a fascinating conversation. An employer brander, yes, employer branding has adopted data. We've had, sometimes been forced to adopt data and become good at data. But I don't know that anybody says, I'm really good at data, I'm going to get into employer brand. It's a secondary skill set at best. So in your world, what do you think is worth measuring? I think you've touched on a few things that are interesting. I think if you're looking and applying that data inside purely the TA space, it's gonna, if you change those things you've talked about, that's going to make a big impact on the employer brand. But what do you think is worth measuring?
Well, I mean,
it's an open question. I know.
No, I mean, so I'm a big fan of measure, have many measures that are set up. And then have only a handful of KPIs. So realize that I have that method. So it's like there's 7 things that we look at that are insightful. And let's say that there's 7. But those 7 things, maybe you're talking about diversity and inclusion, you're talking about brand familiarity, you're talking about speed, you're talking about recruiter efficiency. These are insights that you want. Right? Those insights are probably made up of probably 3, 4, or 5 measures. Right?
Yeah.
So what's, you want to say, I want to know my recruiters are being efficient. Okay. Are they getting back to people quickly? Are we getting interviews done? Are we getting the right number of interviews that we want for the requisitions that they're assigned to? And are they doing that in a fair and balanced and diverse way? It's fair to say. And then are they doing that, within a decent amount of expense, right?
Mhm.
Okay, those are all fair questions. Okay, so in order for me to say, are my recruiters efficient? I need to actually answer probably 4 sub questions,
Yeah.
right? So I think that we tend to kind of think, well, what are like I love like the blog posts that go out. They're all like,
Mhm.
here are like the 12 recruiting metrics that everybody needs to have. Wrong.
Yeah.
What, right? It's
Right.
what's insightful to your business that helps them make decisions. Okay,
Yeah.
there's probably a handful of questions. Then behind that are 3 or 4 measures that are, you have the time to fills, and you've got the, are people seeing our campaigns? Are they coming to our landing pages? Are we getting, bottom of the funnel conversions? Okay, you can look at all those little things,
Mhm.
and so for employment branding, you want to look at, hey, the bigger question is, am I increasing the familiarity of my brand in the spaces I want to increase the familiarity of?
Mhm.
That's the big question. I, I,
Yep.
I hire a lot of people in engineering. We have trouble there. Am I making it easier with my employment brand to get candidates for my managers?
Yeah.
And by the way, does the talent potentially look better than the talent we previously had? That's probably the big question,
Yeah. That's a great way to put that.
right? Then the next question is, well, how do I measure that? And it's like, well, I'm going to look at, so there's activity. And so you'd say, well, I have to produce things that say, hey, we have outreach. We're spending this amount of money here. We're doing these campaigns. We're sending out these types of messages in the market. Okay, are we getting response? Right. And so that's important. You have to look at, okay, are we getting more attention? Right. But then we also have, you also probably want to go to the bottom of the funnel too, and then say, all right, are we getting more action?
Yeah.
So, I'm not a big, huge fan. I'm not a big fan of employment branding professionals staying very focused on bottom of funnel metrics. I think those
Okay.
are important, and you need to know them.
But
But
they're outcome metrics.
I, in like saying stuff like, well, this is how many people became applicants. I'm like, okay, I'm actually more interested in, did the number of people who came to these landing pages, did we get more reaction from our campaigns? Are we getting more shares? Are we getting more familiarity? Right. And then we want to say, okay, that's supposed to bring us more applicants. Right. And, James, you're a whiz at this too. You and I both know that attribution
Ugh.
is really hard,
Impossible.
right? And so multivariate or multivariate attribution or multi-touch attribution, people are trying to hack this, and there's some good standards. And I worked with the group at ATAP on sourcing and branding standards around measuring,
Mhm.
and we were talking about how if you really want to do attribution, you've got to use several formulas for it.
Yeah.
So when the company calls me and says, hey, how are we doing on our sourcing and branding? I'm like, well, there's like 9 ways to measure attribution. Like, which one are you going to use? I'm like, all of them. And they're like, you can't be serious. I'm like, yes, you have to do all of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Because when I hit in, because if you want to understand if your pay-per-click marketing is revealing results, realize that I've got to look at all the different models. But then I've got to figure out, and this is where I think this is one of the things that I think your listeners will like, is you've got to not only pay attention to how many clicks are coming to the websites or how many people are opening, you also want to understand the contribution that employment branding is making to who's been evaluated and who's been interviewed.
Mm.
So you can't assume that we know that not everyone's getting the job. So the question is, did employment branding, did sourcing, did our referral programs, whatever it is, did it make the hiring manager's decisions easier and have more variety? And so people say, well, we're not getting any hires from this employment brand. I'm like, you recognize that that brand accounts for 50% of the female applicants and interviews that you've had this past year? Yeah, but we didn't hire 50% of females. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, but that's somebody else's problem.
That's somebody else's problem. But you know what the other problem is? Your sourcers don't get females.
Yeah.
They don't know how to source there. They don't get this. They don't get that. We have to pick it up over here.
Yeah.
Right? And so you've got to look at the other attribute. I mean, and I say things like, white, female, individuals with disabilities. These are all data. I mean, I appreciate people are people, but for me, these are data attributes that people ask about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They're being very finite about it. And I'm like, well, that's great, but you've got to then understand that, hey, our employment brand delivers this many interviews a year. Well, how many hires does it have? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to hire someone on the basis of whether or not they found us because they went on they clicked a pay-per-click ad. That's not part of their assessment. Mm-hmm. How they found us and why they came is not part of their qualifications for employment.
Do you ever look for that? Have you ever looked at data that says if they look at a lot of our videos, they look at a lot of our content, they touched a lot of these different platforms before applying, are they more or less likely to get the job? Have you ever considered that?
You can look at those things. Unfortunately, the data in the aggregate isn't very telling there.
Yeah. Okay.
Because and the reason why is because we tend not to do campaigns that hit all the applicants.
That's fair.
Right? We hit so you can actually look at, well, hey, we did a bunch of campaigns for engineers. I'm like, yeah. Well, did our employment brand bring in a bunch of engineers and did we hire them? I'm like, I certainly hope so. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, wait, you deliberately designed a campaign because you knew there was a shortage of engineers. Yes. Mm-hmm. So you made up videos and stories and all these things and you marketed them to engineers. Yes. So you're asking me, did they see it and did they get hired? And I'm without me looking, my assumption is probably.
Yeah.
Because you marketed to them, but you didn't market to the frontline supervisors in your plants. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you ask me, will our frontline supervisors in our plants seeing our videos? The short answer without me looking is probably not. Well, why is that? Yeah. Because they're not going to that landing page. You didn't market them that way. None of the keywords that you've organized are for frontline supervision in manufacturing. They're all in engineering.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of appreciate that sometimes the questions we get require a significant amount of reframing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what analytics is about. It's about asking sharp questions, but usually the first step is reframing the initial question.
Yeah. My back when I did a lot more analytics thinking, my rule of thumb was analytics doesn't never give you an answer. It gives you better questions.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I think that's this is a great place to stop it. Andrew, it's been an amazing conversation. I think there's some great points that people should be able to take away to help think about. And honestly, I think if nothing else, I think it reframes the idea of when we think about analytics, we can go deeper. We can put pieces of data together. We can consider one against the other. It's not just about what does the dashboard tell us. It's about what do we really want to get out of our data? What do we really want to learn? And I think this opened the door for some people. I would imagine it did. So,
the easiest way is, you go out to LinkedIn. I'm out there, and you can do a follow on me. I tend to stay pretty tight with the invites. But it's amazing how many people, but I'm tight with people like you and others. If anybody ever wants to talk to me, you just go ahead, give me an email at andrew@aspenanalytics.io. But the other thing to do is to find somebody that you know who knows me and ask. Say, hey, would you take a few minutes? No problem. If someone's in my LinkedIn network and they introduce someone to me, I always take the phone call. Hey, thanks so much, James.
The world's best-known investor and Wall Street expert Warren Buffett once said, "Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls-Royce to get advice from those who take the subway." Mr. Buffett's quote is remarkably accurate, but how many people would rather receive advice from him than someone simply guessing? Welcome to Buy, Hold, Sell, your single source for Wall Street knowledge and profitable guidance. Please join me, Todd Schoenberger, and fellow trader Tobin Smith, as well as host Veronica Dudo, for a podcast known to move the needle for investors. Tobin and I are seasoned Wall Street executives with deep investment experience, and we are prepared to share our advice to those who choose to listen. Download Buy, Hold, Sell today on the Evergreen Podcast Network or your favorite podcast channel.